in the painful silence of bare lands, in the whisper of changing sands, like a cry in agonizing birth. Hear the calls of life, the groans of earth. For all who live upon this soil. To survive, they must toil. But for men and earth to give their best, in due time, they both cry for rest. Life in the desert margins is a matter of give and take. Man must give the land proper care to continue taking what he needs to survive. The scarcity of rain in these areas makes this a more delicate situation. This is true for most of southern Africa, where more than 90% of the land is slightly less arid than the typical desert. Drylands like these cover 1/3 of the Earth's land surface. Climate changes and human activity threaten to degrade these areas towards desert-like conditions, where fewer inhabitants would be able to survive. This is the reason for the Desert Margins Program, in line with certain objectives of the United Nations Convention to combat desertification. The Desert Margins Program operates in 9 African countries. Its purpose is to arrest land degradation and promote alternative livelihoods. Working at ground level in South Africa, the Desert Margins Program knows the condition of the land, and it has a story to tell. It can tell what it has heard from the voices of the drylands. In the southern Kalahari, between the Namibian and Botswana borders, in the northern Cape province, lies the Meer district. It is arid, with sensitive, sandy soils. Livestock farmers live a hard life between its soft red dunes. Here, Gert Titis shepherds a flock of almost 400 sheep and goats. There is no water on the land, where he has been farming for about 20 years now. Every second to third day, Gert must walk his herd 3 kilometers to and 3 kilometers from a watering point on another farm. The vegetation en route is heavily trampled. The dunes are bare and eroding. Gert knows what would improve his situation.
As a man, je water op je plaats, ja, daar kan je beter aangaan. En als je hem nou kan kampen krijgen, is het ook beter.
Paddocks would allow Gert to control grazing. While certain paddocks could be open to grazing, others could be closed to rest and revive the vegetation. However, Gert does not own the farm, and he does not see sufficient reason to invest in it. Gert also does not remove the 3-thorn bush, an invader plant, because he says that his animals like to eat its flowers and leaves.
Nou, dat is een probleem met die 3-toren. Die mannen wat hem dan nou uithalen, halen hem nou uit, maar ik ga hem nou maar zeker.
The Desert Margins Program encourages farmers in this area to remove this bush so that more nutritious plants can grow. Gert does take some advice, especially that given on his favorite radio program.
Wat ek nou like om te luister is die landbouradio. Hier so tot 12 uur as ek nou hier by die huis is. Ek het baie geleer ook daardeur aan veldbestuur.
Goeiemiddag en ons sê baie welkom by RSG Landbou. Ons staan so aan die begin van 'n week en ek hoop dat hierdie week
Gert loves the Kalahari and hopes his children will own a piece of its land. Not far from Gert, Koos Smith also farms with livestock. However, his approach is different. More than 40 years ago, Koos took the risk of sinking a borehole with his own money on this farm that was not his at the time. It only became his property more than 20 years later. He believes that you must invest in the land.
As jy hierdie Kalahari bewaar nie, dan vat die wind om. Want as jy nou oor daardie droë jare wat hy kaal is om maar aanhou oorbenut, dan sal hy mos nou wys aan word.
Koos also took the advice of researchers and began removing the three-thorn bush. Now, more palatable vegetation stands in its place. Though he is over 70 years old, Koos is still ready to learn.
Jy moet bereid wees om te leer en na raad te luister en te kyk na jou veld. As jy dit nie oppas nie, dan gaan jou hulpbronne en dan kan jy nie verder gaan nie.
Another eager learner in Mier is Liesl-Dana van Schalkwyk. He attends farmers' workshops and tests what he is taught. He learns what livestock breeds are best to farm with and how to manage his land. This has led to his farming success.
Ek wou nie hê my kinders moet kom soos wat ek gekom het nie. Dit moet met hulle beter gaan. En ek self wil daarom nog die laaste paar jare wat ek leef, wou ek daarom 'n bietjie beter leef. En toe het ek begin om te luister wat ander sê, bietjie kop gebruik en 'n bietjie rond te kyk hoe dat ander mense gemaak het om beter aan te gaan.
Liesl is better off. Solar power replaces gas power and motor vehicles replace donkey transport. He has also built himself a brick house and given his children university education. Liesl also has strict rules for his game farm to control the numbers of wild antelope that are hunted in order to protect the vegetation. One particular hunter thought Liesl to be too strict.
Ons moet probeer om te bewaar. Al begin ons met wat, maar ons moet bewaar. Daar moet iets oorbly. En toe ek my reëls gee, toe sê later vir my man, maar dit lyk vir my jou wild is baie minder as wat jou reëls is.
Because the hunter did not agree to Liesl rules, he was turned down, along with the money he offered. It's sometimes difficult for established farmers to accept different ideas based on research done in this area.
Letter 2.
Youth do not have such fixed mindsets and are easier to teach. The Desert Margins program works with the government's land care program to bring school groups to the Kalahari to introduce them to better land practices. Here, future landowners learn what plants are preferable and how to plan a farm with watering points and grazing systems. Seppi Esterhuizen from Landcare believes that children need to understand the value of the country's natural resources.
Van jongs af moet ons besef dat ons natuurlike hulpbronne bepaal eintlik ons vooruitgang hier in Suid-Afrika.
The land of the Malopo lies on the western side of the Northwest Province. It looks lush, diverse and plentiful. However, drought can strip it of vegetation and leave its inhabitants in desperate need. Communal farmland poses different challenges, as here farmers use a continuous grazing system. Their animals graze off all the land, and at times too many animals graze in small areas, leaving vegetation sparse.
Like you say, this is
Government extension workers cooperate with the Desert Margins program to advise these farmers on how to manage their land best by giving it time to rest and not overstocking it with animals. Extension workers know the land areas they work in well and are fit to train others. One such worker is Joseph Nyamule.
Mositsane o montsi mara bojang ha o bo sheba ga bo bontsi jaaka mesitsane le dilo tse dintsi tse so ha o sheba ka hana ga ikhutsitsweng teng o tla itlhela ile gore ke nnete gona le ha o ka sheba mo karolong e hae gona le bone mesitsane le dilonyana tse dingwe mme ga di dintsi jaaka ha o ka sheba o ka bona tlhaga yone ka bo yone le ha gong boleng isi bo enne bo boko di bo.
Ernest Paul is a communal farmer in the Malopo. He wants his herd of cattle to have good grazing land, but this is not always the case.
Kante naga isiame ke rona re sai sireletseng ka go e naya lobaka lwa gore re bone gore ha pula dina a go tswa seo.
Ernest relies on his cattle to survive, but his cattle also rely on him. He believes that if he looks after them well, they will be more profitable for him. Frans Sataye is also a communal farmer in the Malopo. Like Ernest, Frans cares for his livestock and the land. He has taken the advice of extension workers to move his herd according to seasons, and he can see how this benefits him.
Ka mokgwa le ka teng ke bona ka re gatela pele mme ke gatela pele tota e tonna thata ka yana ne re setse re le ko morago mo bophilong mme gone yana ka se sebaka ke tla go lebella sente gatela pele ya rona re isa go botshelong.
This is Namakoland and part of the succulent Karoo biome, one of the richest succulent deserts in the world. Here, on the western side of the Northern Cape province, lies the village of Polshoek. It's small, remote, and home to about 600 residents who are either unemployed or live off a very low income from livestock farming or temporary jobs elsewhere. Many are dependent on disability or pension grants. To contribute to their livelihoods, the Desert Margins program encourages residents to have their own vegetable gardens. To Getruide Brandt, her garden is the beginning of greater things.
Ek kan 'n besigheid op die einde van die dag van dit maak. Dit wat ek nou leer. Klein beginne en op die einde van die dag kan ek my eie besigheid miskien maak.
Desert Margins program representatives provide training, seeds and garden tools to eager gardeners. One of these representatives and a researcher in the area for the past 7 years is Lee Simons.
There is a need for alternative ways to bring in not just income, but something in kind as well. And that's where the Food Garden Project definitely steps in. It allows for something tangible in people's lives, something that they can take pride in.
Gardeners must watch out for foraging donkeys in the town. These donkeys also eat much of the grazing vegetation around Polshoek. Most are wild and have no owners. Gert Joseph stays close to his herd and has seen how the donkeys trample the vegetation.
Hier kan nou hoeveel droog veld staan. En as jy hier donkies inset oor 'n maand, as jy hier kom, dan lyk dit jy die wêreld gevee so op het lim gevreet.
Once land is trampled, the presence of unpalatable and poisonous plants increases. Gert keeps his animals from eating too much kraalbush, which causes abdominal swelling. The Desert Margins program works with the Agricultural Research Council to research how resting the land can help in solving such problems. Gert Joseph has more land and he practices nomadic grazing. He's careful not to allow land areas to become degraded.
Ek bly trek met dieries. Al maak ek net 'n verwisseling soos hier ander kant oor is 'n staanplek vir my. En ons het nog 'n plaas, Windpoort, wat ons somer plek is.
Ons hang nie van
Rys. Ja.
For Gert and other farmers in the area, it's their knowledge of the land that keeps them alive. A knowledge passed down from generations who have walked the land and monitored its condition. Although livestock is the major concern in the drylands, other uses of the land deserve equal consideration. The Suid-Bokkerveld also lies in the Northern Cape Province. It's unique in that it shares in the Cederberg Sandstone Mountains the only place in the world where wild rooibos, a herbal tea shrub, grows. Here, small-scale farmers produce the richest flavoured rooibos tea. Generations have farmed with rooibos tea, but with poor access to markets and low profit returns. They could barely make a living. Now, local farmers like Koos Polser are part of the Hayveld Cooperative. They formed the cooperative with the help of the Desert Margins program and a non-governmental organisation, the Environmental Monitoring Group. Now they have their own facilities and an international market eager to buy their produce at a price it deserves. What do they think of land conservation?
Baie belangrik. Want het bestaan vir ons is dat die grond bewaar om ons lewe heel te maak op die grond. Maar as ons die grond nie bewaar nie, dan kan ons nie bestaan te doen.
Rhoda Lowe has researched the differences between rooibos grown in cultivated lands and wild rooibos harvested in the natural vegetation, as well as how the local people farm sustainably with wild rooibos.
Our argument is that if one tries to use the wild tea sustainably, and if you can conserve the natural habitat of the wild tea, not only are you looking after the wild tea as a subspecies or a species, but you're also then looking after the other co-occurring species.
In her research, Rhoda learned much from the practices of these farmers. They farm organically in that they do not use pesticides, even when growing seedlings. They also leave vegetation strips between their cultivated lands to conserve natural vegetation and reduce wind erosion. This kind of indigenous knowledge often comes through personal experience. Hendrik and Susanna Hesselman have lived in this area all their lives. At first, they only farmed with livestock. Later, they put their bread money into raising their first crop of rooibos tea, but lost it due to wind erosion. Now they sow rye between the tea plants to protect them.
Die min geeltjies wat ons gehad het, dit ons nou alles daar aangesteek. En nou sit in ons verlies die plantjies het doodgegaan. Maar daardie wat ons toe met die rooibeelte geplant het, is wonderlik. Hulle het almal geliewe. Dit is nog die bosse wat nou hier staan.
For Hendrik and Susanna, their success has not come easily.
Dis nie 'n maklike werkie, dis harde werk. En jou moed moet reg sit. Jy moet nie net vandag gemoed hê nie, môre nee, ek sal nie môre weer gaan werk nie.
Farmers like Hendrik and Susanna now share their hard-earned knowledge with younger, less experienced farmers. The Desert Margins program, through the Hayfeld Cooperative, provides opportunities for this. Most farmers want to participate because they want to conserve the land that they depend on. Life in the drylands is not always easy. People here may have different uses for the land, but they know that in whatever they do, they must use the land with care if they are to succeed or simply survive. The land is their basis for life. Thus, the Desert Margins program bases its activities in the drylands on the interests of the people. This is a vital lesson that the Desert Margins program has learned, according to its global coordinator, Dr. Saido Koala.
The most important key is to involve the rural communities, is to provide them with livelihood. And this livelihood can serve as an entry point as well as a basis for the work on land degradation.
Through the sands of time, voices have their turn to tell how they live, to share what they learn. Their common purpose stands. To live, we must care for Earth. Heed the voices of the dryland.